You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Ashley Sutterfield. She is the founder and CEO of Sage, where she helps good food business owners consider their production options and determine the right fit for their businesses. So if you're someone who has been wondering if self-manufacturing is the right thing to do for your business as you grow, or if perhaps partnering with a co-packer is a better idea, this episode is going to offer you a lot of insight into those and other options that you may want to consider, and give a bit of guidance on how to make the right decision for you and your business. If Ashley's name sounds familiar, that's because it's not her first time here on the Good Food CFO podcast. She joined me once before in episode 15, where we talked through all the costs associated with onboarding with a co-packer. So if you reach the end of this episode and you determine that onboarding with a co-packer is the right move for you, you definitely want to check out that episode. Without further ado, let's get to today's topic. Hey, Ashley, it is so great to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah. It's good to be with you.
So we should share with the audience that since our initial podcast together here, where we talked about the cost of onboarding and working with a co-packer, which if you haven't listened to, I think it's episode 11, go check that out. But you and I have worked together on a few client projects, and as a result of our work, have identified that there are a lot of questions around: should a food business owner continue to, manufacture their product on their own, or should they outsource the manufacturing to a co-packer? And if they keep the manufacturing in-house, are there other options they could consider? What is a business owner to do, basically, right? And so we're going to try to tackle that topic today together, and discuss the options that people can think through as they're trying to decide how to grow their brand.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I think it's something that companies, as we've learned, have so many questions around, and there's a lot of pressure to go the co-packing route. And while that's a great option, there's other options that I think don't get consideration or even acknowledged a lot of times. And so giving companies the idea of what is possible and why you might choose to go one route over the other is really important.
Yeah. So why don't we start by sort of laying out what your production options are, and maybe giving a little description about each, just to make sure everyone listening is on the same page.
Yeah, so the first option that I think most people would be familiar with from a terminology standpoint is co-packing. And co-packing is really when you hire someone else to manufacture your product for you. And it's about building a trusted relationship with someone that can produce your product. You are essentially hiring them for that manufacturing time and production of your product that they're doing. The second option would be self-manufacturing, which is where we consider most companies, especially when they're starting out in their first 2 to 3 years of business. You probably have a commercial kitchen that you're working out of. But self-manufacturing from a scaling perspective is something we think about. You may be purchasing your own kitchen facility. You may be expanding into more efficient equipment to make more of a production line rather than just a day-to-day manufacturing operation. And then the third option would be self-manufacturing to co-pack. And that simply means that you may be expanding your facility or your space in a way that you're producing your own product still, but you see an opportunity to capitalize on a revenue stream to co-pack for other people of a similar type of product. And so we consider that a long-term plan. The last option of that would simply be a combination of all of those, or to do co-packing and have somebody produce, but then also have self-manufacturing, maybe of particular products, or you want a co-packer in a different area of the country than what your self-manufacturing is.
I love that. So 4 options really, just to recap. So we've got co-packer only, self-manufacturing and doing so just for yourself, a combo of self-manufacturing and co-packing for other brands, and then that 4th option where you're working with a co-packer, but then you may also be self-manufacturing on a seasonal basis or special product basis, something like that. This is a financially focused podcast, so I'm sure that people are thinking, I hear this a lot. Well, if I move to a co-packer, I'm going to save money on production and my product costs are going to go down. So I want to address the big money question right up front. And I'm wondering if you can speak to whether or not, if a producer moves to a co-packer, if they will save money.
Yeah, good question. It's unfortunately not. We don't view co-packing as a cost savings. We simply view co-packing as you buying your time back. And so you're hiring somebody that can produce your product, but you're simply buying your time so that you can focus on sales and marketing or other areas of your business. And so that co-packer is now taking on the risk and the cost associated with producing your product. And oftentimes they may have very similar costs to what you're doing. They may have some efficiencies built in, but they're still going to have some cost around pallets and sourcing ingredients, different pieces of overhead that you may not incur in your business currently. But as you're buying that time back, we're going to have to keep in mind that you're going to pay somewhat of a premium for that. And we don't expect costs to decrease.
So it's safe to say that choosing one of the 4 options that you laid out is not going to be a purely financial decision.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of, we have to determine how it fits where you want to go with your business and what you want your role in the business to be. And that's a big determining factor in which route you would decide to go.
Yeah. I was just speaking to a business owner yesterday who loves the creative process, right? The flavor development and product development and creating of the labels for the product and the marketing and the branding. But she literally was like, ugh, I don't like production, and I don't want to do that anymore. And it's nearly enough to deter her from growing the business and continuing. And I think, something that's holding her back, and maybe we can touch on this a little bit now, is this belief that no co-packer can do it as well as I can. They're not going to care about the quality of my product. It's not going to be the same if I have someone else do it. Can you speak to the validity of a statement like that, or maybe some considerations that business owner and similar minded business owners might think about?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a big concern. And you are giving up control of the quality of your product to someone else. And you can put safeguards in place with product specs and, of course, meeting with your co-packer on a regular basis and quality checks. But there is a certain aspect of you're giving up control to someone else to produce your product. But what it comes down to is building a relationship with a co-packer that you can partner with and that you truly trust to produce your product. And they are out there. I know it seems we hear horror stories all the time about, well, I'm switching co-packers because it just wasn't a good experience. They didn't produce my product right. But what I would say to that is doing our preparation work ahead of time before we ever start talking to a co-packer is vital to moving forward with a co-packer, and not jumping on the first co-packer we come across that could potentially produce our product, but rather vetting and doing our due diligence to determine, are they the right co-packer? What does intuition feel like with this relationship? Is this somebody that I trust? And if so, then I would say, if you don't enjoy your production yourself and making your product, then handing it off to that co-packer that you can trust is going to be essential for the growth of your business.
And all co-packers are not created equal in terms of not only the products that they specialize in making, the equipment and machinery that they have, but also the size and how the actual production is done. And you and I have worked on a project together where, one of our shared clients was considering a co-packer who was essentially going to be doing everything by hand, just like the client was, but, off-site. She was going to be, taking it over for her. And it could have been a good option, but in that particular situation, it wasn't cost effective. So there are situations where, kind of going back to, will we save money when we move to a co-packer? Sometimes it's more expensive than what you're able to do in-house. And so I think considering the type of co-packer, like you said, sort of that gut check of like, how does this intuitively feel working with this co-packer, and just really doing your due diligence, but also keeping an open mind that co-packer is not a term where all things are created equal. And someone like you can help folks find the right co-packer for their business, which is wonderful.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Co-packing is something that I think we often overlook. We think of co-packers as kind of this end-all be-all to production. And really, a lot of co-packers got their start because they were a food entrepreneur with a product that they had on the market and they couldn't find the co-packer they wanted. So they developed their own self-manufacturing and started co-packing for others. So they're a small business too. And just as we run our small businesses differently, every co-packer runs their business differently as well. So if you find one that just isn't quite feeling right, trust your gut on that and be willing to branch out and look for other co-packers to partner with.
Yeah. So let's talk about why would someone choose a co-packer? I'm kind of going back a couple of steps here, but just making sure that we're really clear for folks, like, as they're thinking through these options, why would someone choose a co-packer rather than self-manufacturing?
The big reason is if somebody either doesn't enjoy production, they want to focus more on sales and marketing. Co-packing is an option for somebody who is looking to outsource production and have more time on their plate to focus in other areas of their business. And this can look a lot of different ways, but for that owner, the check that they want to be doing, the questions they want to be asking are around, what is my role in the business? Let's say 5 years from now. What do I want to be doing on a day-to-day basis? And if they see that, like when you're envisioning that, and if you see it as I'm our salesperson and I am completely in control of growing our business from that standpoint, or I am just the strategic mastermind behind everything, then production is probably not where you're going to focus and it's not the best fit for you. So outsourcing that can be a really good option for those types of owners.
I love that you're tying back in, what do you want your day-to-day to look like? Because one of the, I guess, ethos or, things we want people to always consider as they're building their business and making decisions is doing it on their own terms. Yeah. And so this whole episode really is like doing production on your own terms, right? And if you are like the person I described and you're like, ugh, I can't stand this production, outsource it, right? You don't have to do it. You can build your business the way that you want to. And it takes work to find the right co-packer, but I think you and I are in the same camp and believing that there's a co-packer for everyone. It's about doing your homework and finding the right partner.
Exactly.
So why then would someone choose to self-manufacture? What would be some of the things you're thinking through and considering for that option?
Yeah, if somebody does enjoy operations, I work with quite a few clients who love the engineering piece of their business or optimizing processes, and production is just a natural fit for them, that they thrive in that space. That's an ideal person to continue self-manufacturing and to grow their business that way. And for some clients, it may be that you're simply wanting to grow your business on your own terms and you want to have control of production And it may not mean that your day-to-day is in production. You may be hiring the right people to run that type of business for you. But you're in a place where you still want control possibly, and you want to know that the quality is to the standard that you want it to be. And you may have access to facilities where you can easily grow.
Yeah. I'm thinking now too about another business owner who literally travels 2 hours to get to the kitchen that has the right setup and capacity to produce her product. So, that's 2 hours of travel each way to produce your product, right? So if you're thinking about kind of going back to when you might co-pack versus when you might co-manufacture and thinking about the day-to-day, also take into consideration, like, how far do I have to travel? What does my team have to do? Do I have difficulty hiring and finding people? I mean, the climate right now, they deserve and are asking for higher wages, but the reality is small business owners don't always have the ability and the room in the budget to pay the wages that people need and deserve. And so there is that financial aspect that does come into it, but also logistics and also all sorts of things. And so everyone listening is going to have a different, I think, response or like list of reasons that they would choose one over the other, which I think is great. So let's talk about the third option, which was self-manufacturing to co-pack for other people.
Yeah, so this is an option that we see companies take if they want to remain in control of their own product production, and maybe that's based around cost and exploring other co-packers. That could potentially just be that they still enjoy production and that they want to build almost a third or a second business around this, right? That we would consider this a manufacturing company now that is co-packing for others, but also co-packing your products. So it almost becomes it does become a separate business is what we should clarify. And with that, you now have this option to have a revenue stream coming in from a manufacturing facility that you're using to produce your own product as well.
It seems like an important consideration for this is, not only the space and the machinery to efficiently produce your own product, but the capacity to insert the production of another or several other brands' products, right, in a day, a week, or a month, right? So if you're operating at max capacity in your facility, the ability to process or to manufacture products for another brand might not be possible. So there's a capacity component to figuring this out and if it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And in those cases, we recommend phasing into this type of business model because we need to get the systems in place for self-manufacturing. Does that mean different pieces of equipment that make it more efficient? Or does that simply mean that we're putting you on a structured weekly schedule so that you're getting the max production that you can? And then we transition into co-packing for others. So it's like the foundation needs to be laid before we ever take this third step into co-packing.
Yeah. And without, sharing too much because client work is always confidential, we've had the pleasure of working together on a project where a brand decided to self-manufacture and is looking forward to co-manufacturing for other brands in the future. And in addition to the physical setup and workflows and all of that, it's been really fun to set up the financial workflows as well. We just aired an episode recently about financial workflows, and it was actually inspired by this project, considering, how does it make sense for the co-manufacturing business, right, to track inventory and to, invoice their customers. And in this case, the customer is your own brand, but because they're two separate entities, you need to charge, right, the brand for the production. So I think it's very fun for me. It was really fun for me to set that up. I had a pleasure working with you on it, but I think that's another consideration, to put out there is when you've got two separate businesses, there is a bit of accounting, there's a bit of bookkeeping that needs to be really clean and thoughtfully thought of. And when you go through the steps to set it up for your own brand, it then becomes pretty streamlined and easy to do for those external brands that you will start co-manufacturing for in the future. But just want to put that out there as a consideration. You want to have a team internally or externally in place to help you really get it set up properly and in a way that everything is sort of crystal clear from a physical and financial standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one aspect of each of these options, from co-packing to self-manufacturing to co-pack, is that we have to realize as food entrepreneurs that your role in the business is going to change in some way, whether you're removing yourself from production completely, or you're hiring employees, so now you're managing people, or you're bringing on clients into a co-packing business of your own. Your role is changing. And so to set that expectation from a mindset perspective, and just realize there's going to be a lot of emotions that can come with it as well. But it's a shift. It's a growth phase, right? Like, this is often because you've grown yourselves to a point that you need to find a solution. And so you're coming into this new phase of business that it may be completely unfamiliar territory. And so finding those advisors in your business that can help guide you through the process is going to help also with that emotional side.
Yeah. And I want to ask a question that just popped into my head. You've got a product, you're self-manufacturing with the capacity and capability to co-manufacture for other brands. Can you just co-pack for anybody? Or are there, just what should we be considering about who the right partners might be for us to do the co-packing? I'm using all the terms, co-packing, co-manufacturing for.
Yes. So to clarify that, co-packing and co-manufacturing, we consider that the same thing in our world. But yeah, if you're starting to take on new clients of your own, there's this systems and processes that need to be in place for that. So no, from a manufacturing perspective, we want to start to become a niche, right? Like, to create efficiencies in your business, it's really important to hone in on one particular type of product. So this is why you see co-packers who produce a salsa and they only produce salsas, or they produce a hot sauce and they only do hot sauce, or dairy is another example of being really niche. And we see that across the board because in order to become efficient and put systems in place, you need to be producing the same types of product. That doesn't mean you have to completely hole yourself into only doing baked goods or something, but realizing you have the equipment for that type of product and not investing in, okay, we do baked goods, but we also do salsa, which is completely different product, right?
Yeah.
So that's really an important piece to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about developing a co-packing business.
Yeah. We think about financial efficiency. That's something that we talk about a lot, and it partners with production efficiency. So to use your example, if you're making baked goods, right, you've got equipment to bake and to mix, I'm assuming, right, and to do all the things that are involved in baking. Salsa creation looks very different. That's chopping. There may be a cooking element that's needed, right, to make the product food safe. Now you've essentially got two different production setups in one space. And if you don't have, it just creates some financial extension, if you will. And you're not using your space potentially as efficiently as possible. And you can't offer then your customer the most efficient pricing and production of their particular product. So it's a really interesting thing, but I think it's smart to talk about find your niche, and doesn't mean you only make donuts, but You make donut adjacent things.
Right. Yes. It's within the same realm, right?
Yeah.
And I think to go along with that, when we think about co-packing, especially when we're starting out as a new co-packer, this is something that we feel like we should take on every client that comes our way out of that scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. I encourage anyone that is considering phasing into this over time to do a lot of work around what are your values as a brand, as a manufacturing brand, which is different than your product brand.
Yeah.
And who would be your ideal client? Like, what are the characteristics of that company and who do you want to work with? And so there's a lot of work that goes into even preparing to talk to potential clients.
Yeah. Yeah. So our fourth option was self-manufacturing in addition to having a co-packer. So what are we considering as we think through this possibly being the way a brand works?
Yeah, so I have a really good example of this with a client that I've worked with, and they have a product that they're scaling for a large nationwide distributor. But they also have a lot of regional business that they still have the capacity in their own kitchen to produce for. They just don't have the certifications in place for that large nationwide company. And so they've hired a co-packer to be able to produce the product for this one particular wholesale account. And then they're keeping everything else in-house because they enjoy the production. This is actually something that their whole family is involved with, and they want to continue to be a legacy for their family. But they saw the opportunity that in order to grow our brand, we need to make a choice. Do we expand our capabilities and certifications in our own facility, or do we hire a co-packer to do just that piece of the business?
Yeah. So interesting, because another example of this is a brand that we worked on together where they're self-manufacturing in one part of the country, and they were going to continue to do that because they had regional business there. They also had a brick and mortar space through which their product was being sold. But in thinking of expanding into new markets, they wanted to have a facility on the West Coast. And so they explored that option. Now, in this particular case, we didn't find the right partner for them. And so we didn't end up, moving forward. It's not to say that it will never happen. It's just the timing and the partner wasn't right. But that's another sort of similar example to, you'll keep something local and regional for a variety of reasons, because you don't want to set up, for example, with a co-packer on the West Coast and then still need to ship product back to your home facility, right? Like that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then the other scenario that you mentioned at the beginning is like, you create a product all year long that's the same, right? It's like kind of your standard product. And then you've got maybe a small batch or specialty product that happens maybe once a year that you maintain in-house, because maybe it doesn't make sense to onboard with the co-packer, insert that into your production run, and kind of work that way.
Yeah. And another scenario where we see somebody self-manufacture and co-pack is potentially just as a temporary solution, that they're working to go from having made to order product, and now we're moving to an inventory based business. And so they're looking to build inventory. So they may hire that co-packer and get them in place. But in order to continue to build their inventory exponentially, they'll continue to produce their product and self-manufacture while having this co-packer in place for 3 to 6 months until they transition everything to the co-packers. So this can also be a temporary phase as well.
What would you say to someone listening to this episode who wants to like carve out a little bit of time to think through their options and what is right for them? Do you have sort of like almost like a mini checklist or some things that they can think through?
Yeah, I think first and foremost to start thinking about your role in the business and what you want that to be in the future. Also thinking about, where is it that you intend to take the business? Is there nationwide wholesale that you're going after that you could never produce out of your own kitchen. And so you see that you may still have a few options there, from co-packing to a combination. But to begin to analyze, like, where is it that I want to go with the business? And maybe that means just building it out as a process of, okay, my first step would be to continue self-manufacturing, and this would be the threshold that I could go to with that. Mm-hmm. And then identifying, okay, from there, I would look to hire a co-packer and find the right partner. And within that, then I would continue to self-manufacture and co-pack at the same time for a certain period of time. And then I would phase into strictly co-packing from there. But I think it is important for brands to understand their own values about what it is that they want the business to be. What is it that you value in your brand? And if you just don't feel like you can give up the quality control to somebody else, then I think you have your answer around self-manufacturing in some way. Mm-hmm. And that can look different about how you grow your facility or your capacity. But if you're just having that gut, like, anxiety about letting go of that control, or if you just really enjoy the production process, then I think you have a good idea of where you should be focusing. I think what we see in working with brands every day around this is that often what we hear from somebody the very first week we're working with them is where they end up 8 weeks later. Like, right. We explore the different options, but we're always trying to stay in tune to what is your gut saying and what feels right for you. And often companies want to say, like, yeah, I really want to be able, I would love to be able to hire people to produce my product and grow my production capacity, but they want to explore co-packing. Mm-hmm. And that's completely fine. Sometimes it's just really good to have that peace of mind that I've explored that route. It wasn't right. It doesn't mean that we even go to production testing. It's simply that you have that gut feel that it's not the right fit for me. Yeah. And knowing your space and what you want to be doing in your business is really important.
Yeah. Question that just popped into my head that I want to ask. A lot of our clients in the good food space produce their products seasonally, 1 month, 3 month, at most 6 months out of the year in some cases, right? Where it's like, we make hot sauce, we're using peppers, we're using local peppers, right? And so we produce like this time of year every year, and it's all of our product for the whole year. Jam companies do the same. Mm-hmm. Is that a business model that would not work well in a co-packer relationship, or are there co-packers that work on a seasonal basis?
Yeah, so there are co-packers that don't have a minimum number of runs for the year. So it may be that they would take and do a one-time-a-year production for you at a really, at the volume that you need for your inventory for the year. What we need to keep in mind, though, is that in order to fit into that line time, we need to start that conversation the year before, whenever, or at least 6 months in advance, when it's not the crazy hectic season and you're now trying to scale up. You have to do the preparation ahead of time to be ready and into their production line schedule in time for that season. So if it's coming into summer and you're not in that place yet, you need to prepare for the next summer to be there.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad I brought up that question because I think some people might preemptively disqualify themselves from a co-packer relationship with the belief that they don't work seasonally and that you have to have a consistent monthly product runs. I think too, if someone's saying, I really like to make hot sauce, but I only make it a couple months out of the year and I have this facility, what else can I use my equipment and machinery and my space for to generate revenue in addition to my product sales the other months out of the year that I'm not working on producing my own product. We said in the beginning that making this decision is not purely financial, and you just went through the checklist of things to consider and things to think through as you decide this. And then as you make the sort of smaller or micro decisions, within whichever path you choose, I think there are financial considerations there as well. Like I just laid out, self-manufacturing to co-pack, it might be a no-brainer when you think about the numbers and what the downtime of your machines are. So business is exciting. Business is, as Cat Fields White says, passion meets profit. I think the business owners have the passion. You and I have the passion for helping them figure out this part of the puzzle, and the financial piece of it, which is super fun.
Yeah, it gets really exciting when we see companies start to take a step in one direction or the other, and then we get to come alongside and guide them through that process and help them grow their business in the way that's right for them. And I think that's what gets really exciting, is having the knowledge of what's possible and then seeing, oh, okay, this is the path that we need to go for you, and where companies end up and the hope that they feel whenever they have inventory of product and they can go sell their product. Like, it gets really exciting at that point.
I agree. Your business has changed a little bit since you were on the podcast last. So can you tell our listeners name of your company and sort of how you support food business owners?
Yeah, so our company name has changed from Metzger Roth to Sage, and this is actually the first place we're announcing that, so you're getting a sneak peek, everyone.
Very exciting.
And our website is sage.expert, and we're really focusing on these 3 production options with brands and helping you explore those options and understand which path is right for you based on your values and where you want to go with your business. And we want you to feel the hope that it's possible to grow your business no matter which option you choose. And it really thrills us to get to be in this space and help guide companies through their production growth.
Amazing. That's so exciting. And we will be sure to include a link to the website in the show notes. And Ashley, it is always such a pleasure to have you here. I'm sure we'll have you back again. There's so much to talk about on this topic. But thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.